Okay, here I go. Good evening to our virtual audience, and welcome to Socially Distant Mother, Boulder. My name is Stephanie Springer. Oh dear. And welcome to Socially Distant Mother. My name is Stephanie Springer, and I'm the executive producer of Socially Distant Mother. My co-producer, Megan Voss, and our creative consultant, Ellen Nordberg, and MC Jesse Smithwick are here with me as well. While we never could have imagined 3 months ago when we held auditions that this would be our reality, we are thrilled to bring you a wonderful collection of stories tonight. For a while, we deliberated about whether to share these stories virtually and wondered if our pre-quarantine experiences were still relevant. We recognize that this is an unprecedented and emotional time for us all. Although, let's be honest, we've been waiting our whole lives to be able to perform in our pajama pants. Ultimately, we believe that our stories serve as a balm for our collective grief, and that we need stories that remind us of our connection to one another during this period of physical isolation. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Some of our stories contain mature themes and adult language. If you have kids watching, now might be a good time to plug them in for some age-appropriate screen time. Also, it's worth mentioning, though probably obvious, that we are all performing from our homes. Our dogs might bark, our children might barge in. Like all of you who are juggling pets, jobs, and families, we are embracing imperfection and navigating a new normal. And finally, please bear with us with any technical issues. We are new to Zoom and we're learning as we go. You can follow along with us tonight via our online program on our website or the PDF we emailed prior to this show. Now I would like to introduce my co-producer, Megan Voss.
Before we share our stories with you, we'd like to thank our local Boulder sponsors. Sage Birth and Wellness is our megaphone sponsor. Sage is a network of professional caregivers who specialize in women's health and wellness throughout the continuum of our lives. They are open during quarantine and can accommodate both televisits and some in-person services as needed. J Lounge Spa is selling gift cards and products online. Birth Center of Boulder is still open to support parents through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. Catherine Davis Allstate is offering restaurant gift cards to support local restaurants as a thank you for referrals during quarantine. You can refer yourself. Jackie Michelle Gift and Fashion Boutique sells gifts, jewelry, clothing, and baby items. Pompadour Salon, located on the Pearl Street Mall, is opening soon. You can support them by booking an appointment for after quarantine, because wow, we will all need some new styles by then. Shredder Ski and Snowboard is enrolling for camps and selling gift cards. Crimson Clover Apparel is offering online shopping and discounts for donations, supporting PPE for essential workers. Yo Colorado sells hats, apparel, and now masks, and they're offering online discounts. Flow Writers Workshops are providing virtual kids writing workshops and are enrolling in virtual summer camps. Darcy Sherman of Sassafras Photo is our fabulous live show photographer. Boulder Blooms is offering delivery on a few of their signature flower and plant arrangements. Mother's Day is coming up, so you guys can keep that in mind. Dova Center for Health and Healing is providing telemedicine and herbal refills. And finally, Ladder Creative Graphic Design for print and web designs our print and marketing materials, and they created our logo for this show. You can find more information about these fabulous small businesses in the program we emailed, and you can learn more about the services that they're providing during quarantine. We're so grateful for their support. We also want to recognize our beneficiary charity, A Precious Child. A Precious Child assists under-resourced families and children through sports and educational scholarships, birthday and holiday gifts, backpacks with school supplies, and more. They collaborate with over 440 agencies in the Denver area, and they're providing crucial services to families during this period of social distancing. Now I'd like to introduce Jesse Smithwick, who will be our MC tonight.
Good evening, virtual audience. We will have a brief intermission during our show tonight so that you can refill your drink, check on your family, and see how they're doing while you're holed up with your computer. And you can also change from your daytime loungewear into your pajamas. Without further ado, we are delighted to bring you Socially Distant Mother, Boulder. Our first reader tonight is Stephanie. Despite personal academic successes in the 1980s and 90s, Stephanie's incompetence at the third grade curriculum has become woefully apparent, thanks to frequent scornful remarks that she is not doing this right during remote learning time. She has discovered that despite never leaving the house, her time management skills are worse than ever, and she spends much less time working in bed than she would have hoped. She is, however, enjoying watching the Marvel movies in chronological order and binging Gilmore Girls with her 13 and 18-year-old daughters. Stephanie will be reading The Anti-Feminist Agenda of Family Wellness Time.
When our daughters were 3 and 8, we decided to upgrade our whack-a-mole bedtime routine and end the day on a less frazzled note. We called our new hippy-dippy ritual of meditation, breathing, brain gyms, essential oils, and gratitude family wellness time. During its glory days, it was a treasured part of our day and a welcome contrast to previous years of scrambling, scolding, and begging before collapsing on the couch for 45 minutes of television and perhaps a bourbon. After a few months, I decided that once a week we would implement a bucket filling practice, familiar to most preschool parents. Each family member gave a theoretically genuine compliment to everyone else. The first time, I was pleased to hear my daughters sincerely complimenting each other's positive qualities and chiming in with things they liked and admired about Daddy. And then it was my turn. I love how you're always there for me when I need you, Mommy, my oldest began. I love how you snuggle me, Mommy, my preschooler chirped. I like how you've brought music and family wellness into our lives, my husband added. It was sweet, and I appreciated that my family felt nurtured by me. Yet as the weeks passed, I began to notice a slightly troubling pattern. My family members easily complimented each other's talents, but when the time came for the family to fill Mommy's bucket, the contributions all took a similar turn. What Mommy did for each of them. I attempted to depersonalize it and take a larger, more intellectual view of things. Wasn't it fascinating that children acknowledged the positive qualities of their caregivers through such a specific lens? Children are naturally egocentric and perceive other people as relative to themselves, I assured myself. But the children had no problem using adjectives to describe Daddy's attributes: brave, funny, strong, good at fixing things. It seemed that only I was adored solely for the ways in which I fulfilled other family members' needs. My gifts were all those of service. Apparently, my family viewed me as the one cliche I had worked desperately to avoid, the martyr, which meant only one thing. My efforts to raise young feminists was a miserable fucking failure. I had taken active steps to help my children perceive me as a whole person, taking time for myself, writing about motherhood and feminism, spending time with friends. I avidly and sometimes feverishly practiced self-care. Whenever the flares of guilt at indulging in such activities would arise, I repeated the reassuring mantra that I was paving the way for my daughters to one day be whole, fulfilled mothers. Week after bucket filling week, my family praised how I cooked for them, helped with homework, and provided hugs. I felt ashamed for dismissing these accolades as empty and meaningless. What mother would be disappointed with the acknowledgement that she was a comforting, steadfast presence who met her family's needs? Was I really such a hopeless narcissist that I needed them to lavish me with praise for my abilities and achievements? As for my husband, he's a classic acts of service love language dude. So in his defense, he was doling out what for him would have been the highest praise. We words of affirmation people sure are particular about what types of affirming words we prefer to hear, aren't we? Mommy is smart, I craved. Mommy is funny. Mommy is a good singer. Hell, I would have relished Mommy is so pretty, for God's sake. I knew my indignation was somewhat ridiculous. My 4-year-old's bucket-filling efforts often rang false. She referred to Daddy as strong and brave week after week, and often mistakenly praised her sister as a talented artist. Did I expect a keen, discerning eye from a preschooler? Then a new phenomenon developed. When it was time to fill my bucket, my family members seemed to dry up, floundering as they struggled to come up with something to say. As if it wasn't enough to be labeled the perennial giver, now my husband and children drew a collective blank when attempting to identify things they liked about me. It bordered on humiliating. During our final installment of bucket filling, I listened to my oldest child earnestly thank me for always being there to listen to her problems and felt my jaw clench. I love mommy because I love how you go, daddy, I need to think, my youngest child hemmed. I gritted my teeth with irritation. My husband also seemed at a loss. The two of them continued to stall, unable to find the words to say something flattering about me. I nodded curtly as my preschooler tacked on that she loved my hugs and visibly flinched when my husband added that I was always there for the family. With my body rigid, I irritably swirled the singing bowl a few perfunctory times and sent everyone off to bed with an edge in my voice. I knew I was being hypocritical. I clearly hadn't thought about my mother as a whole being when I was a child. I hadn't pondered her abilities, interests, or relationships outside of who I was as her daughter. Maybe children can never really see their mothers clearly, though able to describe their fathers with a plethora of objective, accurate adjectives drawing merit to his excellence. What of my crusade to model the whole empowered mother for my daughters? If my agenda to pursue my happiness, goals, and dreams was lost on them, it meant I could no longer rely on my mission to teach them as a panacea for my guilt. If my children hadn't registered my efforts, the only remaining justification for why I continued to prioritize my self-care and ambitions was because I wanted to. It took some time, but eventually I realized that reason was more than adequate. And I needn't have worried about my anti-feminist children. They came around. My insecurity and defensiveness now feels like a juvenile phase, no different from their own fleeting childhood habits. I needed them to see and appreciate me the same way they needed me to exist to protect and nurture them. Their expressions of love really were the highest praise they could give. I treasured them, and they could feel it. Their attempts to verbalize their gratitude and adoration now feel beloved rather than propaganda in the anti-feminist battle of my maternal identity crisis. My 8-year-old and 13-year-old daughters are now my biggest cheerleaders. They've become inside joke collaborators, deep conversation partners, and my favorite couch snuggling, movie quoting companions. After my hasty and extremely unzen renunciation of bucket filling, family wellness night gave way to the frantic shit show bedtime era, followed by the more harmonious Harry Potter read aloud book club. Although we never resurrected the fraught and soul-destroying practice of filling one another's buckets, my daughters and I now lie next to each other in bed, listening to a recorded meditation before falling asleep. Full disclosure, we often get the giggles when the dog, confused, runs all over the tops of our rib cages or hides under the bed, eviscerating a stolen piece of trash. There's often complaining and elbowing, and sometimes I hiss, "Everybody shut up, we're supposed to be relaxing, damn it." We fill each other's buckets with our touch, our togetherness, with the things that go unsaid. We are all growing up. Thank you.
Such a wonderful start. Thank you, Stephanie. Rohini is a wife, mother, traveler, and writer. Her escapes these days to the bathtub or to the kitchen for a late night snack are rather less exotic, but still feel indulgent. Between trying to remember what day it is and the circus of raising her 4-year-old, Rohini is grateful for the continual beauty and wonder of life. Rohini will be reading Goddess of the Moon.
If you ask me my name, I will tell you that it's Rohini, and that Rohini is the favorite wife of the moon. I was found in an orphanage deep in the heart of South India, in the bustling city of Madurai. I don't remember the first few weeks of my life, although I can imagine the horror of being ripped from the security of a womb into the harshness of this world. The raw humanity and chaos of a public hospital in India is no intimate thing. Soon after my birth, I was taken to Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity to live in their orphanage. The nuns were patient and full of compassion, yet there were only 6 nuns for every 100 children. Having no time to hold me, the nuns propped baby bottles filled with watered-down goat's milk next to my tiny mouth. When half the orphans died of dysentery, and me, the youngest, at 6 weeks old, survived, but shrank to 3 pounds, a miracle came into my life. Her name was Genevieve. She was a native Australian. She was tall, fair, and maybe as lonely and lost as I was. In her early 20s, heartbroken in her first love, She had left Sydney and traveled across continents to end up years later in an ashram on the scorching coast of South India. On a temperate day in December 1976, Genevieve visited the city of Madurai. She was asked by friends to deliver adoption papers to the orphanage. Genevieve entered the orphanage with no intention of adopting a baby. The sweet nuns urged her toward the crib of a little boy, the only male child in their care, a prize in a sea of girls. In my country, to be born a girl was unlucky. Girls required a dowry and a husband. In many cases, it was easier to dispose of us by starving, drowning, or burying us alive after birth. Girls had no intrinsic value other than becoming a good housewife, and even that was debatable. The year I was born held the record in my part of the world for infanticide. I was lucky to be alive. Genevieve showed only kind interest in the young boy. She wandered through the array of cribs, drawn to my tiny cot with green paint chipping off its rusted metal bars. She picked me up and held me in her arms, all 3 pounds of me. My bony body was swathed in a worn cloth, revealing only my little round head and face. I opened my big brown eyes, they were all that was left big on me, and stared up at her. Rohini. Genevieve had never heard the name before, but it came clearly as if angels had whispered in her ear. Then another ethereal whisper, I'm coming home with you. She placed me back in my crib and left the orphanage. She paced the streets, unsure of what madness had taken hold of her. She entered one of the city's many temples and found a quiet corner to sit and contemplate. Surrounded by intricately carved stone goddesses, known as the 27 Wives of the Moon, she noticed one in particular. As she moved forward to study it closer, she saw etched into the stone the name Rohini. Genevieve left Madurai that day, but she knew in her heart that she was going to be my mother. She waited a week to let it settle before she telegrammed the orphanage. Hold that baby for me. The nuns knew exactly which baby she meant. The day Genevieve brought me home, she refused to take any pictures. I was too small, too skinny, my flesh hanging limp from my emaciated limbs. She bathed me in a mixing bowl, afraid I would slip away in anything bigger. While the carpenter built my crib, I slept next to her in an empty drawer padded with white flannel. I cried when she held me, not knowing what to do with the closeness, and I cried when she put me down, not knowing how to be alone after my days of emptiness. I'd never experienced true love and belonging before. Now, 43 years later, my mother, Genevieve, is still a fierce lioness protecting her cub. She's my biggest advocate, my best friend, and my soulmate. For me, there's no greater bond than the love between a mother and daughter, regardless of how you're birthed into each other's lives. So if you ask me how I got my name, I would tell you a goddess gave it to me, because that is the only answer my mother had.
Thank you, Rohini. While Ellen has had pandemic nightmares of flying on a hijacked plane bound for Earth, she's reassured to know that her husband dreamt of RV repair and their teenage twin boys dreamed about making out with hot TikTok dancers. Ellen will be reading, Please Don't Ask Us to Feed Your Cats.
What kind of a mother would deny her kids a pet? When my boys were 5, a neighbor's son knocked on our door. His family station wagon was idling outside, roof rack piled with camping gear. They'd forgotten to arrange for a pet sitter, and I, stay-at-home twin mom, was the only one on the street, clueless enough to answer the doorbell. The boy mumbled about dry and wet cat food, tossed the key at me, and ran for the car where his father gunned it out of the neighborhood. I placed the key on the counter and went back to unloading groceries, texting the babysitter, and scraping dried applesauce off the TV. 3 days later, I rediscovered the key under Kung Fu Panda and choked on my cranberry juice. I left my stunned family at the breakfast table and flew down the sidewalk like a crazed witch, bathrobe flapping behind me. My family does not have pets, despite the boys' repeated begging for everything from a sheepdog to a trout. This is mostly due to my allergies and my lack of desire for the responsibility, but partially due to my childhood pet traumas. There was the lizard who escaped and was later found fossilized, boiled behind the steam radiator. The feral cat who bit anyone who attempted to pet her and spent most of her days under the stove. And the gerbil mother who rejected her tiny pink screaming babies, which had to be disposed of by our parents. You don't want to know. I fumbled with the door, anticipating a feline scolding. Instead, silence. Clueless as to the cat's name, I went through the rooms calling, "Here, kitty, kitty," and saying silent prayers that the creature wasn't lying dead behind the dryer. I tore through the house and eventually found him up against the wall under the guest room bed, lying on his back, paws splayed out, tongue lolling, hyperventilating like he'd just completed a half marathon. I filled his bowl with fresh water and set it alongside the bed. No response. I pushed it closer. Nothing. Finally, I reached under and towed him out by a leg, the mop-like fur of his belly scooping dust bunnies as he came. I propped his head up to the water bowl, cursing this duty and swearing this was reason number 457 why my family would never have pets. We checked on him 17 times until his family returned, whereupon I confessed to the 3-day lapse. In case the cat didn't poop for a month, I felt they needed to know about this brief lack of moisture. We were not asked to pet sit for them again. Several years later, another neighbor approached and asked if our 9-year-old boys would like to be paid to care for their cat during a 4-day weekend. My boys in charge? Only 4 days? What could possibly go wrong? But then it occurred to me, this would so work in my favor. They'd flunk the responsibility test and never beg me for a dog again. We happily took her key, and the boys made plans to play with Rico, the sweet kitty, after school that very day. 48 hours later, I woke up at 3:30 a.m. to a coyote howling in the open space and the realization no one had fed the freaking cat. Once again, I leapt into action, wrestling into my long down coat, hoping it covered most of my pajamas. It was -7 degrees with 80-mile-an-hour winds, so I threw on the black knit cap that had not retained its original shape after washing and grabbed a day-glow yellow flashlight the size of a car battery for good measure. I scurried up the icy sidewalk in my slippers, mildly worried for my safety. Then I caught a glimpse of my reflection via streetlight in the neighbor's storm door and figured the odds were much better that someone was going to call the police on me. Fortunately, Rico had spied me coming and launched himself at my ankles as I came through the door. I was so relieved he wasn't dead or licking the condensation off the inside of the basement windows that I picked him up and rubbed his head. Several bowls of food later, we sat down on the couch. And then my eyes started to itch and my throat tightened up. Ditching Rico, I sneezed my way back home, the idea of returning to sleep, a hopeless dream. At breakfast that day, I casually informed the boys I had gone over to feed Rico in the middle of the night. After the sound of cereal spoons clattering to the table and milk drooling out of mouths had ended, Aiden looked at me sadly. "We're never going to get a pet of our own, Mommy, are we?" "No," I said, "not unless his name begins with Chia."
Thank you, Ellen. Jen is sorry to share with you that she's become an unfortunate cliche during this pandemic, learning to bake enthusiastically with yeast, meditating with the assistance of a mobile app, and experiencing for the first time the bougie thrill of a hand-me-down Liberty puzzle. She's so happy to be breaking up the Groundhog Day-ish nature of these strange times with the brief interlude of storytelling with others. She will be reading Helmet Laws.
Whew. When I returned from my high school summer exchange in Italy and walked into the international arrivals terminal, my mother didn't recognize me. I dyed my hair red, Not chic Emma Stone Hollywood red. We're talking more iridescent apple red. I'd had it done in Florence in an act of joyful adolescent rebellion. And I remember thinking I'd changed so much that summer, I wanted an outward way to represent it. My mother was pretty angry. She saw this hair dye debacle as a perfect example of what happens when you let your children stray too far. In general, she was just not a fan of travel, of venturing too far. She didn't even really approve of sleepovers spent at friends' houses in Long Island or Connecticut, only an hour away from where we lived in New York. I suspect this is rooted partially in a Chinese culture that values children staying close to their parents, in particular in adulthood. The idea of keeping alive the village, so important to immigrant communities. But it was also rooted in what felt like my mother's fear of the unknown. She'd not gone too far outside of the New York Chinatown, where she'd landed as an immigrant when she was 7 years old. Meanwhile, I was 15, immortal, daring, and had plans to see much, much more than our local neighborhood. As a teenager, I couldn't have felt any more different from my mother or distant from her view of the world. 8 months after I'd returned from Italy with bright red hair, my father died of a heart attack on a New York City street corner. My mother was left with 3 children, me, 16 years old, my sister, 13, and my brother, 11. My mother had to learn everything, how to pay the bills and balance a checkbook, how to help us with our homework, how to calculate postage for a letter. These were the things I observed her taking in patiently during the day, while at night I listened in the dark to her deep and muffled sobs through the bedroom wall. Time passed, and I went off to college, continuing to adventure farther than my mom would have approved, eventually living and working in Hong Kong after graduation. 6 years after my father died, my hair long since back to its normal color, I learned that my mother had a boyfriend. His name was Billy. He was an engineer who'd been repairing a broken escalator in the high school where my mom worked as a secretary. The courtship went something like, Billy told some of my coworkers I was hot. Then he came into my office and he asked me if I wanted to go to lunch at the Gee Whiz Diner down the street. And thus began a love story that became a marriage between my 5'0" immigrant Chinese mother and a 6'something Italian escalator engineer from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Billy, who had countless tattoos, a Brooklyn accent, and machismo to go around, didn't seem like a natural fit for my mom, but somehow it really worked. They began to share interests in the same things: home improvement cable shows, holiday ornaments on clearance, and getting out of the crush of the city as much as possible. They did this on the sweet ride of Billy's Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Against all odds, my mother became a biker babe. It turned out she'd taken up with a major Harley-Davidson enthusiast, and she began taking trips on the back of Billy's Harleys all around the pastoral parts of New York State and New Jersey. Eventually, they went on weeks-long pilgrimages to places like Sturgis, South Dakota, the country's largest motorcycle rally, and to see the redwoods on the West Coast. On the one hand, I was thrilled. My mom was experiencing a sort of renaissance, exploring the country, and perhaps more importantly, exploring an adventurous side of her that had been dormant all of these years. On the other hand, I wasn't a huge fan of these trips. They seemed dangerous to me, especially when my mother told me that on the touring bike models, she could actually fall asleep while Billy was driving the motorcycle because it was so relaxing. Have you ever heard of a motorcycle ride being so relaxing you could just fall asleep? One day she'd even called me from one of these cross-country trips and said, honey, it's so terrific. Colorado, Wyoming, so many states don't require you to wear a helmet. I can feel the wind in my hair. And I said something like, is this serious? Mom, you wear that helmet. What if you got into an accident? What would we do? Are you crazy? She poo-pooed me and we went on with our lives. My mother, the risk-taking roadie, and me, now the curmudgeon, trying to keep her safe. My mother and Billy never got into a motorcycle accident, but about 8 years ago, she was diagnosed with advanced stage kidney cancer. She passed away more than 2 years after her diagnosis. An incredible feat of survival and strength. Nearing what was to be the end of her treatments, she and Billy took a big road trip to Anna Maria Island, Florida, this time by car, and all of her adult children flew to meet her there. Sitting by the pool, she told us that it would be her last big road trip. The ride from New York to Florida had been too hard on her frail body. And all I could think was how glad I was that my mother had gotten to take enough road trips so she could even have a last one. I realized maybe we weren't so different at all. And I was grateful that she'd had a chance to explore the world on the back of a Harley Davidson with the wind in her hair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jen. Raul seeks out the adventurous side of life any way that she can. Always one to stay busy, teaching, dealing with her 2 children, and getting a new dachshund puppy still aren't enough for her. Raul has turned an eye to gardening and yard work in preparation for a social summer. She has big plans outside of the house as well. This year, Raul bought a kayak and a puppy-sized life vest, and the dangerous duo are looking forward to getting out on the Boulder Reservoir and basking in the sun. Raul will be reading Not Afraid.
Why am I throwing up? I was asking myself in the ladies' bathroom after leaving my physics class in college. I was not feeling so good, so I called my driver to come and pick me up from the female-only college in Dammam, Saudi Arabia. After he dropped me off home, I found myself asking so many questions, like, why is my period late? Why does everything smell so weird? Oh, is it now where I need to take a pregnancy test? How does a pregnancy test even work? Oh my God, is it 1 line or 2 lines? What does that even mean? Why am I holding this up? I am only 17. The next morning, I traveled for 4 hours to Riyadh to see my parents who were worried about my unexpected visit. I told my mom that I wanted to talk to her. So we went to my old room and she asked me in a joking way, "What happened? Did you fight with your husband? Did he yell at you or hit you?" I responded in crying, shaking voice, "No, Mom, I think I'm pregnant." My mom was immediately shocked, confused, and excited when she asked me, "Why are you crying? It's a good thing." I looked at my mom in disbelief and said, "Really? But I don't know how to be a mom." In my mind, I wanted to cry, jump up and down, and tell her, "I just got married about 3 months ago to the man you chose for me." I knew my mom was thinking, yes, this arranged marriage is a success. But what she said to me was, yes, you'll be fine. Wash your face and let's go share this with your father and siblings." As I responded in acceptance and thought to myself, yes, of course, let's go share this with my 8 siblings. I guess I'm doing fine in this arranged marriage, as long as I don't share my feelings or opinions and I obey everyone. In the years after, I learned by myself how to be a wife and a mom. I also learned to accept the fact that some people did not want it to hear about my suffering. I became the good daughter who lived thousands of miles away from her family. I obeyed the husband chosen for me took care of my daughter and my son while going to college, both in Saudi Arabia and then after here at CU Boulder, as a full-time student all at the same time. I did a lot to be a good mom for my daughter, Maha, and son, Abdul Malik. Even though I felt I needed a mom myself, I felt like a lost child who still needed support in many ways and so many situations. All I knew, and I know, is that I love my kids and I would do my very best to be a good mother for them. I was 19 when I changed my major from physics to early childhood education to read and learn more about Maha's age. I was very eager to learn more about how to take care of my beautiful Maha. I got a master's degree in educational equity and cultural diversity to help her transfer from an only Arabic school to only English school and understand the education system. I also finished a special education endorsement to help her with her reading. Years passed, and my handsome son is now 9. He is the smartest, the sweetest, and with his big heart and charming smile, he is handling and dealing with our girly drama. My sassy daughter is 12, almost 13, and we share so many things. We share the same food. We share the same shoes. We like the same food. We wear the same hoodies. Oops, I think I raised a mini-me. The way she argues, talks, cries, and asks for chocolate before her period are the same. As I was reading this speech in front of my daughter, she said to me, "Mama, do you know that you are the best mom I can ask for? Like the best. But oh boy, you did a lot in your teen years. Like that's cool and stuff, but please, I don't want to get an arranged marriage. I want Maha to advocate for herself and have a strong voice. And I want her to be able to choose what she wants, to be strong, to be kind, to be successful." After 14 years, filled with many stories of me crying, fighting, moving far away from my family, and divorcing my abusive ex-husband, here I am, holding a master's degree, speaking a different language, writing my own story, and sharing it with all of you.
Thank you, Raul. Christine runs her own company, the Institute for Unlearning, is an executive coach, facilitator in business transformation, and an actress in the Denver theatrical scene. She is not a mother in any conventional sense and has 3 rescue Yorkshire Terriers. Her story is taken from a collection of essays of her life in Africa. Christine will be reading In Africa.
Africa mothered me, found me in my kitchen over a wall, loved me a rope, tied it around me, and pulled while I climbed, hand over foot, out into my own bright life. I went to Africa, to a Tanzanian beach bungalow north of Dar es Salaam, the city of peace, and there met an Englishman, a fireman, on assignment with ISAR. He came to swim in my pool under an indigo night. "There's only ever one of 2 things going on," I told him. "We're either making an expression of love or a cry for it." Over the next 3 years, we would fly to each other across 2 continents to explore every corner of each other, every cathedral, a testament to what we found holy in the mundane, where we fell in love, laughing inside the circle of our days, resolute in the belief in one another. How we adored being at the edge of the world. My period stopped. The well's gone dry. I couldn't meet his eyes. I'd been sitting on a plane for 18 hours, wondering how I would tell the firemen that our secret wish for a child was never going to happen. I could barely tell myself. I kept coming back to something he'd said in passing. I was too old for him. We sat in his garden, staring at the clematis blooms. They nodded casually. Then his shoulders sagged. He pulled me to him. It's not fair. You would have made such a mother. I breathed him in. We pushed against each other, fell on the stones, bone and skin, afraid if we let go, we'd disappear. Because our timing was irreconcilable. Because with all the hope we'd stitched into our story, we couldn't happen. And because we knew it. I left England the next day. I never saw him again. A month later, a photo gallery on the fireman's Facebook wall of a young woman someplace ancient, dramatic poses struck just for him. That day I walked to the market, bought pounds of hard African oranges, brought them home, dumped them in a pillowcase, and beat every inch of me. I wouldn't stop until I'd smashed the last of my insides to pieces, pummeled out of my blood everything that pined for an immaculate life. Each morning, Mama Ibra, my housekeeper, nursed the fresh bruises I'd made, helped me to the kitchen, brought me tea like redemption. She sat at the table and folded her hands in her lap. We would sit for long stretches listening to the children playing over the wall, waiting for words like hope to arrive. She hung the clothes out to dry while I curled in a ball on the cool tile. Your heart must rhyme with itself now, she said quietly, then swept the floors. She took up the pieces of me. We gave each other small devotions, slung close, the way Swahili women carry their children. We all make our walk together, even when we cannot feel it. She said it as she carried water in or peeled papaya at the sink. You will see. Behind my bungalow sat a 2-story house. It was concrete walls and a roof, holes cut for windows and doors, and around it, hard red dirt, nothing else. 3 women lived there. A whitewashed wall separated us. 2 of the women had children. The third, their cousin, was childless. They were loud. They sang. They fought. The children laughed, ran, and shrieked at the thrill of running. One of the kids cried. He wailed. He would sit against the far wall holding a beat-up toothbrush and cry for hours. When I'd hear him, my throat closed up against my own house, so tight I couldn't breathe. On a Sunday morning, a scream blew across the wall. I ran out the back door, climbed up onto our washing sink, and peered over. The cousin sat in the middle of the yard. She rocked back and forth, chest thudding her thighs with the force that sent her flailing backwards.
Try mine and see what happens.
Her head lurched, mouth wide open. She repeated this over and over and over. She held on to herself like she would fly apart. I needed it to stop. Swallowed the scream about to tear through me, but the women, they would not hurry. I let loose a strangled howl. It pushed me up and over the wall, barefoot, squinting, taking short sideways steps to her, on a crate, panting. The sisters danced around her, chanting softly, "Dada, sister." One of them motioned me into the circle. Their hands stroked her back, her head. They carried fists of long grass, beat the air. She groaned and drooled. I hummed to myself. We swayed, heads lolling, drummed the ground with the soles of our feet. Sweat poured down my legs, tamping the dirt into mud. And then the wailing stopped. I opened my eyes. The sun was almost gone. We carried her off the crate. The woman cradled her, wiped her face and arms. She looked up at them, her face shining. They caressed her cheeks and made small sounds which floated up into the roar of cicadas. I brought a basin, washed her feet. I cried over them. And then their hands were on me, smooth, cupping water over my forehead, whispering, "Mtoto wetu," our child. The three of them laughing, smiling down at me. After a long while, I stood stiff. It was dark. Asante sana na lala selama. Thank you, and sleep in peace. I climbed back over the wall and went inside. I left the pillowcase of oranges on the counter. "It's demons," Mama Ibra nodded after I'd explained. "They were doing a what? She hunted for the word." "Exorcism," I smiled. "Exorcism, Dio, yes. There are so many demons, and for women with no mother and no children like you, they have many, many demons." Mothers would never stand at the edge of the dark and exclaiming to each other about your fall. They get a rope. They climb down in. They take your ravaged self into their arms. They eat the shame that keeps you bound away from love. They haul you up out of the hole so you can be the rays of beauty in your own harvest. But not my mothers. They had nothing left. Their holocausts had buried them. Not until me. Not until Africa. Not until the ancestors found me in its red dirt. Africa. I could hear my heartbeat. It was good.
Thank you, Christine. Before the global crisis, Melissa never knew that homeschooling would really be 85% classroom management of an unruly class of one and 55% teaching online navigation. And the fact that this adds up to more than 100% clearly demonstrates why helping her first grader with his math homework just about does her in. What she has learned is that one more educational site to log on to can reduce her to tears. And spending so much time with her 6-year-old also produces its beautiful moments of grace and glory she would have otherwise missed. She will be sharing the undertow.
"I cannot do second grade," I announced emphatically to my mom the summer after first grade. "Dad, I cannot do this. I can't finish everything. I just can't," I said with conviction, about 3/4 of the way through every semester in college. "I can't" has become a constant, unwelcome companion through every life transition. I was so ambivalent about becoming a mom. I really didn't want to. I really did want to. I just didn't know. And mostly, I just felt I can't be a mom. I look back and all the things I was afraid of, all my worries about becoming a mom, I was right to be worried. But as it turns out, I didn't even know what I should really be worried about. But motherhood has this sneaky way of digging out our most vulnerable, broken places and bringing them into the light, unavoidable and in our face. Case in point, the undertow. My funny, smart, loving 4-year-old son was lying on the couch when he started thrashing around, pulling my hair, hitting me, all with a strange look on his face. Angry, amused, vacant? He threw himself to the ground, flailing his arms and legs while yelling, "I have bad feelings!" This marks the beginning of what we now refer to as the undertow, when we were swept away in an unexpected, strong rip current. He went into the kitchen, found a butter knife, and came after my husband, saying, "It's cutting time." He stood in the living room in front of Grammy, and while looking at her, said to my husband, "I'm going to kill your mommy." We later determined it was a perfect storm of events leading to this breaking point. The final piece that sent him over the edge was giving him over-the-counter Miralax prescribed by his pediatrician for constipation. He had a neuropsychiatric reaction to that, which causes violent thoughts, excessive irritability, and wild mood swings. This intense period of extreme behavior was largely due to the Miralax, but it wasn't only the Miralax. It was also a time of big transitions, months of constipation, stomach aches, headaches, which finally led to a diagnosis of a strep infection in his gut. And then there was also the fact that he had been exposed to drugs in utero, maybe heroin, meth, cocaine, which we later learned reaching out to his birth father. We left no stone unturned. Got him on antibiotics, stopped using the Miralax after one dose, play therapy, occupational therapy, cutting out wheat and dairy, taking new supplements, weighted blankets for anxiety, a minimal schedule with limited activities. I talked to doctors, naturopaths, homeopaths, therapists, parent coaches, and even a medical intuitive. Unbeknownst to us, at this time, his young and beautiful birth mother was spiraling in her addictions, and 5 weeks after the undertow started, she died of a heroin overdose. That night, I stood over Max's bed as he slept, crying and feeling so heartbroken. And I thought to myself as I watched my sleeping son, one of the most significant, heartbreaking, and important things happened today, and you don't even know it. The week following her death, it felt like the fire went out for Max. I know that he and his birth mother are so deeply connected, that her spiraling out was somehow connected to his spiraling out. And when she was at peace, I believe he could feel that. We waited a full year to finally tell him. It was the 4th of July. We were playing outside with our neighbors. We were talking about young kids' perceptions about time and how they have no idea what time of day it is or how long a month is. And we talked about how the word yesterday just means anything that happened before today and could be months or years ago. This was on my mind when the next day we committed to telling Max the news that his birth mother had died. It was the 1-year anniversary of her death the following day. It was definitely time. When we finally told him, the first words out of his mouth were, "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" Before I was a mom, I was worried that I would be really tired. I am. I was worried that I wouldn't have enough time for my own interests, my own work, my own friends. I don't. I was worried about the financial cost of parenthood and worried we wouldn't have enough money. We don't. There were so many times during that intense year that I would be so depleted, so exhausted, so overwhelmed that I would cry more in months than I had the entire 4 decades prior. Sitting on the floor of our bedroom with my back against the closet, sobbing, I would say to myself over and over, I can't do this. I can't leave, and I can't do this. And here I am. I am a mother, and it doesn't always look pretty. I can't is still my trusty companion, always along for this wild ride. But it turns out I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So we will see everybody after a brief intermission in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
We hope everyone is settled back in and ready for the second half of Socially Distant Mother Boulder. Shawna is excited to be coming at you tonight from her home office in the Denver Tech Center. She has shoved all of her messy piles of work just off camera to create the illusion of a sane, organized person. Shawna is a big fan of the Zoom filter, which promises to touch up her appearance and is embracing the opportunity to fulfill most of her life's obligations without ever putting shoes on. Just outside her office door, Shawna's husband and daughter are tuning into the show on a laptop, and two disgruntled cats roam, hatching a plot to get their house back. Tonight, Shawna is wearing contact lenses for the first time in a month and will be reading Goodnight Noises Everywhere.
My daughter is about 3 weeks old the first time I read her Goodnight Moon. I know, it is way too early, but the first few weeks of motherhood have been rough, and I am desperate to share a perfect moment with this tireless, demanding, volatile infant. For the 10 years prior to this pregnancy, I've worked in a Devil Wears Prada type environment, and she is harder to please than any boss I've ever had. Look how excited she gets when I read to her, I gush at my husband, waving the open book in front of her expressionless face. He backs me up. She's a genius, but we both know she probably can't focus past her own nose yet. As she gets older and I start reading to her every night, she does begin to love it. And the magnitude of my commitment hits me. I will read some of these books thousands of times. I will go beyond having them memorized. I will know every typo. I will cringe at every bad rhyme. I will have an opinion on font and the quality of the binding. I will question the motivation of bunny rabbits and hippos. As soon as she can talk, my daughter negotiates for more books every night. I'm an easy mark. I give the characters in the books unique voices to entertain myself. In one of her favorites, a little bear asks several animals what they think of the present he has chosen for his friend. I model the voice of the elephant on Marilyn Monroe. I think it's too small. And the cute squirrel apparently hails from Transylvania. It would be much better if you gave it to me. Books based on TV characters, I replicate their accents with a Meryl Streep-like authenticity. The characters in Kipper are British, and one of them, a pig, has a constantly stuffed up nose and is always pushing around a baby pig named Arnold in a stroller. It isn't clear who this baby is. Are these two brothers? If so, there's no sign of a parental pig. I draw the only logical conclusion. This pig is a single father, raising Arnold on his own. Mrs. Pig probably fled, driven mad by his chronic congestion. I can only imagine that he snores terribly. But the voices make it fun for both of us, and it only backfires occasionally when I'm reading to her and suddenly become aware that she is staring at me in confusion and disappointment. What? I ask. That's not Toad. It isn't? No, that probably has to do with Toad's obsessive compulsive tendencies and Frog's infuriatingly laid back demeanor. But maybe I'm projecting. Someone gives us the nightmarish book, Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. It tells the story of a young donkey who happens upon a pebble which will grant him any wish. He then encounters a hungry lion, and to save himself in what has to be one of the worst split-second decisions ever, turns himself into a rock. He is helpless to turn himself back into a donkey since, now he's a rock. After a desperate search, Sylvester's parents give him up for dead, while their son remains alone in a nearby field, an existentially depressed donkey Boulder. After almost a year, a bit of good luck restores Sylvester to his parents. I find the book unbearably sad and try to hide it from my daughter, but she has a knack for finding it. So when I am forced to read it, I skip past the character's torment to get to the uplifting ending. But to me, the ending isn't all that happy. I mean, what had the months of hopelessness, despair, and grief done to them all? Weren't their donkey lives forever changed? Once, there lived a rabbit who was made almost entirely of china. She is 7, and we begin reading a chapter book, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. Neither of us knows the story, and we read a few chapters a night. I'm meeting the characters with my daughter. Their accents are all over the place. I am taken aback by the character who is an abusive drunk. I peer at my first grader. Should I be reading this to her? I don't know what else is coming. But at this point, we're both into the story. There is no going back. When we get to the last paragraphs, Edward's difficult journey wraps up in the most sublime way, and love and life are affirmed, and it truly is miraculous. And I can barely get out the words because I am sobbing. My child is also crying while looking at me with more than a little bit of concern. I bury my face in a tissue and take a heaving breath. I'm sorry, it's just so beautiful. These are happy tears. I love this book so much. She nods her head. She understands and leans into my side. We cry together for a while before I kiss her goodnight. And this is the moment, I realize, the one I wanted to have all those years earlier with Goodnight Moon. And maybe you don't get a perfect moment if you're protecting her from the sad parts or worrying about giving a good performance. The perfect moment happens when you are helplessly swept away by a beautiful story. And sharing it with my kid is so much better than I could have imagined. I can't wait to start the next book.
Thank you so much, Shawna. It's such a beautiful story. And for everyone in our audience, technology is a beautiful thing as well, right? Originally from India, Jessica is deeply touched by humanity's capacity to give so generously during this pandemic and is holding on to the silver lining that we will emerge reshaped from the inside out after it is all over. Working from home as a board member for the Boulder Food Rescue, helping families in this crisis, she is also connecting with friends and family around the world on Zoom calls. Jessica is treasuring the extra time to play with words and write more, family walks on a sunny spring afternoon, and whipping up spicy Indian appetizers in the kitchen. Jessica will be reading Threshold.
That Easter morning when you turned 4, you were busy coloring eggs under the Rocky Mountain sun. You darted on the green grass, the meadow so fragrant with your breath, your steps, your long sweet shadow. You crossed a threshold, not knowing what lay on the other side. I watched your pastel yellow dress fly in the sun, your auburn hair refusing to stand down. The spring breeze held your gaze as I collected the colored Easter eggs spread out on the table. You dipped the eggs in color palettes, memories of those moments diffusing any doubts that a forever of forgetfulness will swoop in out of nowhere and blanket us for years to come. I long to capture the simple drama and seal it forever in memory bottles to be opened decades later. As I scooped you up that spring morning, you smiled like there was no tomorrow, as if we had run a marathon together that I knew we will never run again. You are a fighter, training hard always to reach the end. When it rained outside, you would slip on the red mud, so treacherous. You would stumble and we both would scramble. I would help you take enormous leaps from one foothold to another, with each step, the distance between us growing as you got older. Each time I feared the space that sprouted between us, holding on to a threshold of an unfettered connection. You allowed me to place a ladder on your path, a scaffolding built of a trust, of a faith that after falling you will get right up with a smile on your face and a glow of an autumn sunset in your eyes. This I know you will hold on to when you will wake up tomorrow. You will travel each time to the memories that you have crafted so deftly over the years. Remember the puppets that you made from paper and sticks, the show that you put on from behind the couch for mom and dad, dancing your moves to Nat King Cole, singing in the background. And one day you turned 18, and one day you addressed 2,000 students at your school in the March for Life to protest gun violence, and also 200 delegates of the Democratic Party. You stood on that stage, the voice of youth in distress, your dark green shimmery silk dress, your soft face projected on the giant screen behind the podium. As you spoke, my eyes welled up with tears that I didn't wipe. Memories of that spring morning still whipping about when that yellow pastel dress flew carelessly in the sun around your young face. Now, when you hop behind the wheel of your car each time and drive away, I know I will never reach the end of the road that you will reach, or be able to guide you at crossroads to choose the right or the left. Your enthusiasm to keep punching a hole in that blue sky spread stubbornly over your head. Your capacity to shed tears after crossing another threshold, surviving another fire, infernos, your teachers at each step. I now touch the soft fur on that teddy bear with the pink blouse with polka dots that rested under your cheeks every night. Since you've left home, the empty bed in your room speaks so loud. My ears are deafened by the noise that I can't escape. Our journey from that spring morning to when you marched ahead and didn't glance back at all those thresholds you crossed step by step, the scaffolding built and held for you, now permanently framed in.
Thank you, Jessica. As a freelance writer, working from home during this pandemic hasn't changed life much for Amanda. She has had to come to terms with postponing a bridal shower, wedding, and a baby shower, though. In between writing new stories and purging old college papers, Amanda takes time out to rest and to feel and watch her belly pop and baby kicks. Amanda will be reading Protecting Against Imperfection.
I got a letter back from the state, my mother told me on the phone. It says that the rehab center was charged with state and federal violations for neglect. My heart sunk with guilt. It was easier for me to take the blame for leaving my grandma in rehab center where nursing care was compromised. The same nursing aides who rolled her bloated body back and forth like a used car, looking for dents and dings they didn't cause. Scar across her abdomen, a scar across her left and right rib cage, a scar down her right thigh. I heard one report together who took notes at her check-in. Self-blame for an imperfect outcome is how I've always tried to gain a false sense of control in my world. It's what I learned from my mom. It's what she learned from my grandma. Even after my grandma died, we were still trying to perfect her. It wasn't her fault, we told ourselves. She wasn't given a fair chance. My mom and I visited the funeral home together before the service to check in with the mortician to make sure her lips weren't pooched out, per my grandma's notes, and that her eye makeup looked just right. The first time I remember seeing my mother's arms fully embrace her mother, I was 40 years old. I watched from a tiny camera in Boulder as my 68-year-old mother lifted her 99-year-old mother into her armchair in Cincinnati. My grandmother's arms were limp and her head rested on my mother's chest, like she'd surrendered to my weary mother who had tried her whole life to be the good daughter. Grandma had fallen again, and I'd called my parents to say, "Grandma down." I watched on my iBaby app camera as they rushed into her room from their bedroom upstairs. Their distorted bodies moved on my screen like I was watching a scene from some paranormal film. The camera allows the watcher to scan the room and even speak to the person being watched. Grandma, who lived with my parents for 32 years, was told the camera was there, but she paid no attention to it. Call it spying or a breach of privacy, call it what you will, but it was our way of trying to protect my grandma, to perfect her last years of life. It's easier to digest statements designed to perfect and protect when they're coming from someone other than your mother. So my grandma and I came out the other side of these conversations feeling less judged and more loved. I insisted she use her walker when she took her publisher's clearinghouse winning entry out to the mailbox. She snapped, "You sound like your mother. I walk around without it when she can't see me." She tried to protect me too. "You're going for another run in this heat? Don't overdo it. You're going on a boat ride with that guy you just met? Don't let him throw you overboard." And the ever popular, "Be a good girl and don't do anything I wouldn't do." What she didn't say to me, she gifted me. A large D battery operated flashlight, a tiny hammer to break a window, a blaring sound maker. You see, protecting from imperfection is a genetic trait. My grandma tried to perfect my mother, her only child, for 68 years. And my mother has been trying to perfect me for 42. "You are going to have all those people over tonight? When is the last time you dusted?" Grandma said as she ran her finger through a light coat of dust on the coffee table. "Is Mike doing the dishes again?" Grandma asked about my patient peacekeeping father. Mom stared at me one Sunday morning as I stood dressed in an outfit she'd bought me for my birthday. "Is that what you're wearing to church? You look better in what you wore out to the bar last night." Eventually, the perfecting flips directions. "Did you realize you wrote Lorian instead of Korean on that Facebook post?" I texted my mom, wanting to make sure she looked smart in front of both of our friends on Facebook. My mom sniffed my grandma's baby fine white hair and asked, "Your friends are coming over to pick you up for lunch. When is the last time you washed your hair?" "Leave me alone," Grandma exclaimed with her furrowed brow. "Leave me alone" is what we all want to say to each other as we try to protect each other from imperfection, from looking bad, from getting hurt, from dying too early. The cycle is vicious. We perfect each other, false extensions of ourselves, because we feel imperfect. When I asked my grandma at her 100th birthday what she liked about herself, she replied, "Well, let's see. I was a good seamstress. I was a good cook. And well, I thought I was a good mother." "You are a good mother," I told her drooped face. It's so much easier for those words to skip a generation. The day after Grandma was checked into the rehab facility, my mom and I arrived at 11 a.m. I was boiling. I was so angry with how slowly my mom was moving through that morning. I was so angry with myself for not driving the extra car over earlier. "Do you want me to show up this late?" When you were almost 101 years old and just got dumped in a strange environment? I asked her venomously. After 2 weeks of running back and forth to the hospital where Grandma was treated for pneumonia, we were both spent. She threw her bags in her arms to the ground. I am doing the best I can, she shouted at me in the parking lot. I am doing the best I can, she repeated through tears. Well, it's not good enough, I told her as I walked past her towards the rehab door. How do you really know when you're doing the best you can? When you're good enough? I am 6 months pregnant, and while it's in my blood to protect this child from imperfection and to protect my mother from harm, I am working to soften those patterns in myself, to model self-compassion and self-forgiveness, to teach this little one she's good enough, to verbally lift my mother up before she falls, and to remind her, Mom, you are a good mother.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Megan misses many things about her pre-quarantine life, like spring skiing, face-to-face conversations with other humans than the 3 she lives with, and using her precious few hours per week while both children are at school to secretly binge watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She has, however, had more time to devote to one of her secret hobbies, taking pictures of her aging pets in portrait mode and texting them to her husband, complete with emoji captions, which is more embarrassing now that he works from home. Megan will be reading Where is Jesus?
When my daughter Julia was born in August 2011, I started looking forward to Christmases with her. As I nursed and held my tiny baby, I envisioned a little girl drinking hot cocoa, singing Christmas carols, decorating the Christmas tree. And the year she was 2, she started to get it. Julia was a very serious toddler who adorably referred to herself in the third person as Gia. Instead of saying no, she would scowl to show her disapproval with a resolute Gia doesn't. While initially skeptical of my descriptions of Santa, stating Gia doesn't like him, when I told her about the jolly old man who flew on a sled pulled by reindeer and entered our house when we were sleeping, that Christmas lived up to those I had imagined during our late night nursing sessions as a new mom. One highlight of that season was the arrival of the creche my grandfather built when my brother and I were little. Julia squealed with delight when she saw the animals and the little figurines, who were fewer in number than they were when I was young, thanks to a few overzealous golden retrievers of my youth. I realized as I took them out, though, that Julia had absolutely no idea who they were. Baby Abe, she shouted, using the name of a friend's baby when she saw baby Jesus. Her lack of religious upbringing was becoming abundantly clear. That's baby Jesus, I told her. He was born in this barn, and Christmas is his birthday. I figured we'd start slow. That weekend, we went to Steamboat, where Walmart is the only viable option for errands. Early Saturday morning, Julia and I went in for a few things, baby Jesus in tow. As I pushed the cart up and down the aisles, where hunting gear was next to Kool-Aid and Christmas lights were interspersed with vacuum bags, Julia talked about Jesus. Gia loved baby Jesus so much, she said solemnly. Baby Jesus is so cute. And then catastrophe struck. Gia dropped baby Jesus, she said, lip quivering. I prepared myself to find a tiny, obscure item someplace in a large box store. For parents of toddlers, this is a well-known task. Mentally preparing to search baby Jesus figurine from 1985 on Amazon, I figured finding him was a long shot. While I crawled around on my hands and knees, Julia yelled, "Where's Jesus?" and "Gia need Jesus." An elderly woman approaching from down the aisle put her hand over her heart. "It's just so sweet when they're still learning about him, isn't it?" she said. "It is," I replied, and Julia seemed puzzled that strangers seemed to be acquainted with Jesus as well. The smiling woman continued with her shopping, and I continued with my search until I located baby Jesus under some dust bunnies between the aisles. "Mama found Jesus," Julia yelled. A few weeks later, Julia made peace with Santa, thanks to the presents, and baby Jesus and his fellow Jerusalemites were packed up until the next Christmas. Julia asked for him from time to time that winter, and I couldn't help thinking about how strange it was to say, "We'll see him next Christmas, Julia. Jesus is all packed up." Julia did not gain much in terms of religious education that Christmas, but I suppose that losing and subsequently finding baby Jesus in the Steamboat Springs Walmart is as close as you can get to a Christmas miracle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Although coronavirus is a direct threat to Trinity's family, which she will share more about in her piece, she is finding immense spaciousness in the deconstruction of everything. She goes nowhere, eats nothing out, dresses up for no one, and gets a second chance to connect with her partner and their 4 children without any of the distractions that used to disguise themselves of upward mobility. It all feels like a blessed counterbalance to a very personal and difficult season of suffering. Trinity will be reading Medicine and Magic.
I had a dream 6 days before the diagnosis. I'd flown home to say goodbye to my grandmother who was dying of lung cancer. My parents were out of town, so I stayed in my childhood home all alone. I decided to sleep in their bed because I felt like their mattress might hold things I needed to know. I don't know how else to explain that, except I'd had this sense for months now that I was tracking something, sniffing a scent, that something was hiding in the undergrowth and I needed to pay attention. I laid down that night asking, what is it I need to see? And right as I drifted off to sleep, the vision came. It was dark night, and I was standing by myself on a sidewalk bathed in a sickly yellow glow. Across the street was a high concrete wall sprayed in graffiti. I had just enough time to see the wall before a car sailed through the air in front of my face. It spun halfway so that the roof of the car faced the concrete wall, and then it hit the wall with all the force of flight. In the moment of contact, the silver car, because that's what it was, a souped up silver version of my first car, a Pontiac Bonneville station wagon, exploded into bubbling mercury. All the liquid flew through the air and entered my body. My eyes snapped open. 6 days later, my 7-year-old son is in a ball on the bathroom floor, sobbing because his stomach hurts so badly. I'm resentful. I co-run an interior design company and a not-for-profit, and this morning I have carved out the only 2 hours I will get for myself all week. I sigh and I tell him to get his clothes on because we'll go to urgent care after I drop the 3 bigger kids at school. At urgent care, they do blood work, a strep test, check for a urinary tract infection, everything's fine. Then the doctor does the physical exam. I'm on my phone canceling meetings when she says, come over here right now. She's palpating my son's stomach. Feel this, she says, and puts my hands on the outline of a lump. She watches me while I feel all around the edges of it, and it is more than a lump. It is a huge mass. She says, I need you to go to the ER right now. The nurse comes back in with some shitty plastic toys, a maze with a tiny silver ball, a little blue man tied to a parachute. My 7-year-old son blows on a red kazoo because he doesn't know yet. He doesn't know what I know. No one in the whole world knows what I know except for this doctor and this nurse who are trying to make things better because they know they cannot make anything better. I call my partner and I say, hey, I'm at the urgent care with Phoenix. The doctor thinks she's found something in his stomach. Silence. Like a mass, he says. Yeah, I say. I hear him breathing. I refuse to say the thing out loud. I refuse to say this thing out loud to a man who has already lost his mother and his grandmother to this thing. I refuse to say this thing while I stand over my 7-year-old who is trying to get a tiny silver ball into a tiny hole in a tiny maze. I'll get there as soon as I can, he says. By that afternoon, the ER doctor and the ER nurse have done the thing that the doctors and the nurses do in the movies. They've sat us down in the corner with the vinyl chairs and they have told us it looks like my son has cancer. They have told us that we need to drive to Denver Children's Hospital right now. They've told us that they are so very sorry. They are so sorry. Within 48 hours, our 7-year-old son is under anesthesia for a biopsy, a catheter, stents, a spinal tap, and the insertion of a central line port because yes, cancer. After surgery, they send us home for 2 days. When we return, they tell us Phoenix has a mature B-cell lymphoma, stage 3. He starts chemo the next day. At some point in those first few weeks, I remember the dream. What was it that had to explode? 3 words flash into my mind. Car of certainty. The Pontiac Bonneville of my dreams is the vehicle I was handed to get me all the places I needed to go in my life. This belief that good things happen to good people, and by making good choices, you can earn a good life. This is what exploded. Because the car of certainty might look slick and feel safe, but it will never get you out of the parking lot, and it sure as hell can't take you through your 7-year-old son having cancer. We are never certain. We try to forget this horrific vulnerability through all kinds of things, but it is the truth. We're always standing naked in the moment with nothing but the view in front of us and how we choose to respond to it. We can allow suffering to enter us, to transform us, to become the medicine and the magic by which we transform the world. Or we can find another car to crawl into. I choose to open and allow.
Thank you, Trinity, for sharing your story with us. We wanted to share with you that Trinity's son is currently in remission. He will have his 3-month scans on May 19th, and this will be the first time they will be able to see if anything has returned or not. Please think of him and his family and send them love and light. While doing her best to stay safe at home, Kim notices that any anxiety stirred up by the pandemic is offset by the contentment of having all of her children under one roof. The simplicity of this moment in time is much like her own 1970s childhood, when we made time to talk and help our neighbors, cooked and ate every meal at home, and the luxury of experiencing real boredom and the impulse of creativity that follows. This has been an important reminder of what is truly important, taking nothing for granted and remembering that love, too, is wildly contagious. Kim will be reading Heavy Angel.
New Jersey in the 1970s held a reckless charm that we would never get away with these days. The stories I tell my children about my childhood leave them curious for a far more simple, free, and downright dangerous time. No helmets, no seat belts. Some of my stories they're not so sure about. Like when my mom would send me into the corner deli at 6 years old with a $20 bill, her waving from the idling car in her nightgown. I'd ask for a carton of Kent 100s, a gallon of Smirnoffs, and $1 worth of roast beef because, well, we had to eat as well. The nice man would wave at my mom, and my mom would wave from the driver's seat. Like New Jersey in this time period, my mom also held a reckless charm. She preferred animals to people. They were uncomplicated and non-judgmental. She was a collector of strays, stray dogs, cats, rabbits, guinea pigs, snakes, iguanas, our pet spider monkey Sam. We had donkeys, chickens, llamas, peacocks. In 7th grade, she would beg me to stay home from school with her, bribing me with adopting yet another dog from the pound. And she collected people. My brothers and my friends became her friends. Our gay friends came out to my mom long before they did their own families. Tenants who rented rooms in our house to help pay the rent became family. Homeless people were invited for Thanksgiving dinner. My mom was a magnet for the wounded, the lost, the lonely, the sad, and the interesting. She was the first to laugh the loudest, take to the streets and protest, get arrested for indecent exposure, start a food fight, tell a dirty joke, jump into the pool with all her clothes on. She made everything an event. She was an architect of fun. She was forever painting our front door purple or orange, and always we had a red wall somewhere in the house. My oldest brother's friends lived in our garage, having long ago been kicked out of their homes. Even when they sold my grandmother's silver for drugs, somehow they still had a place at our table. I craved normalcy. I would beg her to wear her hair up instead of her spray-painted gold cowboy hat to parent-teacher conferences. It keeps my head on, she would explain, and what 7-year-old could argue with that logic? She was a one-person circus act, and we all bought tickets, fascinated by what might happen next. I loved my mom deeply. I had a hard time being around her sometimes. She was the brightest star on the darkest night. She encompassed both the brightest and the darkest. I never agreed or related to her diagnosis of bipolar. I didn't really understand what that even meant. She was just my mom. To try to define her was to diminish her. The human form was limiting for her, and she was cranky about it. When I look at her life, though, she was either throwing a party or in bed. She married 5 times, and we moved 14 times in 17 years, or maybe it was 17 times in 14 years. I can never remember which. But still, that was just my mom. She would drive me to elementary school in her negligee and that spray-painted gold cowboy hat and nothing else. She was embarrassing, but she was also drop-dead gorgeous, so she got away with crazy shit. She had the power of a beautiful woman walking into a bar, and all the stools of men would swivel to follow her as she walked past. Only I would be walking behind her, backwards, holding up my 2 middle fingers at all of the leering men. Both disgusted by her and protective of her. I was her little bodyguard. My childhood was exhausting. I was constantly bracing myself for the next thing, the next move, marriage, party. My mom had me on high alert, really, until her death 2 years ago. My nervous system is only just now learning to uncoil. The truth is, I feel closer to her now. We get along so much better. I can tell her, I can let her in now in a way that was nearly impossible when we were both human. For my birthday a few years ago, my mom gave me this heavy concrete sculpture of an angel, cumbersome and unwieldy. It's 4 feet tall and 300 pounds. Wrapped in a wool blanket, it rolled around the trunk of my car like a dead body for weeks in the hot summer until I got someone to help me carry it to the back garden. This heavy angel keeps me company. Its face in the sun. I see it as I wash the dishes, as I drink my coffee, as the kids jump on the trampoline. I've come to realize she gave me the gift of herself. Since her death, my mom has ascended. She's no longer heavy with humanity. We are no longer bumping into each other with all our awkward humanness and resentments. Her absence from the physical world is striking. As if she took all the oxygen with her. I'm left dizzy and confused, out of breath, everything slightly muted. She taught me to pay attention differently to life, always showing me what else was possible, another way, defying all the rules and conformity. While I was busy managing my own anxiety, I worry I took her magic for granted. But when I pay attention differently, as she taught me, it's not her absence I notice, but her presence vibrating brightly, lovingly, waking up the corners of my life, throwing the lights up, telling me, begging me, no, inviting me to be just a little more crazy, bold, wild, nutty, generous. Go on, Mom. I'm listening now.
Thank you very much, Kim. Kris has found that she mostly doesn't mind being told to stay at home, doesn't miss doing errands, and can't remember what she used to run around town doing. Though she did recently wonder if there was any new place in the house to sit. Most looked forward to post-quarantine, being freed to once again swim laps outdoors, get a real haircut, and eat a meal out. Kris will be reading Why Mothers Run Away.
In the car on the way to school, after complaints he has little time to complete his schoolwork, my 16-year-old son proudly announces, "Last night I made a playlist of 250 songs." What, I think? How long does that take? My jaw clenches and my hands tighten on the steering wheel. This is just the last in a long string of kid-related worry and frustration. There have been disagreements over smoking pot, school, quitting jobs, vaping, failing to walk the dog, failing to clean the cat box, failing to clean rooms and bathrooms. And failure on their side is leading to lots of feelings of failure on mine. This inconsequential announcement, a mere playlist of songs, sends me right over my parenting edge. I don't roll over the edge gently. I don't peek at the distance below or hesitate. No, I take a flying leap and I hurl myself right out over the precipice. Back at home, after dropping him off, I stomp around the house, I vacuum angrily, and I wash dishes aggressively. My dogs look at me with nervousness and concern. It finally occurs to me that exercise would be a good way to get through my fury, so I get back in the car and go to the gym. Halfway there, something pings in my brain. Sneakers. Did I bring my sneakers? I pull over to the side of the road, zip open my bag to see that, nope, I don't have my sneakers. Well, shit. I fling myself back into the driver's seat and slam the door. Parked on the side of the road, traffic flowing by, I cry and I scream while leaning on the horn and beating on the steering wheel. At this moment, I hate everything. Myself, the world, the sneakers I've left at home, my children, being a mom. I hate it all. I'm done. I'm out of juice. I have no more energy for kids, no more resources. My superpower is figuring out what my resources are and knowing how to use them. But now, even that has run out. I'm hopeless and helpless, unable even to make it to the gym with my sneakers. Back at home and no better off, my unsuspecting 19-year-old comes downstairs. Mom, do we have chai? No, we're out. We don't, I spit. I can't stay here, I tell him. You're leaving? He asks, eyes wide. Where are you going? I don't know. He has no idea who this crazy woman is who used to be his mother. I grab my purse, march out the door, get in my car, and back out of the driveway too fast. And as I drive, I scream at the top of my lungs, yell, and yes, blow the horn. I'm out here because I can't stay there, because I don't know what to do anymore, because I feel out of control, because of the reality that I can't dictate the actions of the people around me, namely my kids, because I can no longer stuff them into a 5-point car seat restraint and have a measure of control, because I've been largely successful at wrestling life into the form I want, but I can't wrestle my kids into that form. I'm out here because I no longer know the answers, and I hate not knowing the answers. By now, I've driven 40 miles west. There are no longer any structures, just steep mountainsides, a sagebrush, a horse, a cow. I think about what it would be like to keep going, to drive over the mountains, to call home and say, I'll be gone for a while. I turn into a rough dirt patch and watch the dust settle behind the car. I sigh. The car's quiet inside, except for its low idle. As I sit there, I know I won't do those things. Why? Because even though there are times I'm over it, done, ready to be an empty nester, to be free, to be able to pack a bag, grab the keys, lock the door, and hit the road, the other truth is I breathe a sigh of relief when the house is dark and quiet and all my little birdies are safely asleep in the nest. Sometimes I want everyone to go away and leave me the hell alone. Other times I want nothing more than to gather them all in a tight circle. I take another big breath. I turn back onto the road and head east towards home. I'll be there in time to make dinner.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you all for joining us tonight. First of all, I want to give a tremendous heartfelt thank you to our fabulous cast. Your stories have been such a bright spot during a challenging, isolating, and stressful time, and we are genuinely grateful for the connection that we have to each of you. We admire your courage in sharing yourselves. We are grateful for your patience as we have navigated this new technical territory that is completely overwhelming, and you've been patient, you've been thoughtful, and you've been enthusiastic. So thank you for that. We know that your stories will stay with our audience for weeks to come, as they have with us. Audience, we think that we have figured this out, that you can see all of us right now. If for some reason I'm wrong and you can't, please imagine us in our Brady Bunch grid. We are going to hold hands with each other right now, and we are going to take a virtual bow. Thank you. To our audience, we want to thank you. You will be able to watch the show again using a Zoom link within the next couple of days. We will send that to you. We're grateful for your support of our production team, of our cast, our sponsors, and our charity, A Precious Child. We wish so much that we were together in person with you at the Boulder Theater, but please know how grateful we are. We feel your virtual support and our connection from afar. We wish you health, love, and connection in the weeks and months to come. Good night and happy Mother's Day. Thank you so much.